Let's talk Chelsea, and more importantly, Graham Potter. Having seen years of success under Abramovich, Chelsea were taken over by Todd Boehly last year, where it wouldn't take long for the American to make his mark at Stamford Bridge, sacking Champions League winning manager Thomas Tuchel. This proved to be unpopular among the Chelsea faithful, and after an absolutely awful run of form recently, to many it looked like a terrible decision. However, if you're a subscriber here, you'll know from my various videos that I've always been heavy to praise both Boehly and Graham Potter, despite a few, let's say, unsavoury comments from Chelsea supporters. But now, after a Champions League second leg comeback against Dortmund on Tuesday, Chelsea are showing signs of growth, with this result being seen as a potential turning point. Now, before I go any further, it's important I give a bit of context around the situation at Chelsea before Potter took over, so we can draw a conclusion on what progress would actually mean for the manager at Stamford Bridge. I'm not going to go over the topic too much, as I've already made a good few videos about it, but as I mentioned, Thomas Tuchel won the Champions League with the Blues just a year before he was fired, and to many, his dismissal felt premature to say the least. And to that I both agree and disagree. You see, in pretty much any other situation, I think sacking Tuchel would have been the wrong decision, both morally and just from a footballing perspective. However, Chelsea find themselves in a very unique scenario. Abramovich himself was a one-of-a-kind football owner, and so of course his departure followed the same trend. And so with Todd Boehly, it always felt like things would have to change in order to create a fresh start from top down to the bottom, as we saw many board members depart before Tuchel was even fired. And mix into this the fact that players described their pre-season as the worst they've ever had and a poor start to the season. It's unsurprising that the German was shown the door, being replaced by Potter. Now I know this is going to sound weird, but in my opinion this sacking was the right decision, but Tuchel also shouldn't have been sacked. What I mean there is that on paper there is no way he deserved to be sacked, nor were there any signs that it was the right decision. However, if you take into account things like the takeover and the fact that players had grown tired of their manager, then I think it was in fact the right decision. I hope that makes sense. Now on to Potter's arrival in West London, it's also important to note that things did start very well for him. 9 games unbeaten in all competitions to start his tenure saw the Blues rise up from the bottom of their Champions League group to the top, as well as bridging the gap to the top 4 with the side having been in mid-table when he took over, albeit very early into the season. But then Chelsea visited Potter's ex-side Brighton, and it's fair to say things did not go to plan. A 4-1 demolition of the Amex started a run of just 3 wins in 17 games as the Blues saw back-to-back losses to Borussia Dortmund, Southampton and London rival Spurs, where on the face of things it looked as if the new manager bounce at Stamford Bridge had ended and that Potter was not up to the job. But the thing is, that doesn't quite tell the full story. Despite the fact that the results had gone well early into his tenure, Chelsea's actual performances were not that great, as he tried to bring in different tactics that the players weren't able to perform properly, and so the side were far from sustainable. And so then going into their poor run of form, Potter would strip them back to the basics to ensure the players were doing everything right before slowly building them up to better performances. As the weeks went by, their performances would then get better despite the fact their results weren't going their way, where going into January, Potter would be back in the transfer market. Now I don't want to cover this too much as I've already done it various times, but what's important to note is that a lot of money was spent by Chelsea, and so people were expecting a big instant impact which simply did not come. After a 1-0 win against Crystal Palace on the 15th of January, Chelsea scored just 1 goal in their next 6 games, drawing and losing 3 each, as pressure on Graham Potter reached an all-time high. However, if you put the results to one side, this spell actually saw some of their best performances all season. Across these matches, Chelsea had a higher XG than their opponents in 4 of them and was certainly unlucky to have not gotten more out of these games. Now what I'm not saying you should do is use XG as a sole indicator for who deserved to win the game at all, but anybody unbiased like myself who watched them across these games will be able to tell you they were certainly performing better than their results suggest, which is why you saw me be so vocal in my support for what Potter was doing at Stamford Bridge. That being said though, football is a results driven business, and losing to bottom of the league side Southampton and being outclassed by a fairly average Spurs side is certainly not on. And so going into their game against Leeds, I do agree with the point of view that a win was necessary. And a win is exactly what they got. Sure, it wasn't the greatest performance in the world, but after a 2-0 win against Dortmund in a game they controlled the majority of, Chelsea turned around their deficit to progress through to the Champions League quarters, deservedly so, having also been the better team in Germany. And so, to answer the question on everyone's lips, is this a turning point for Graham Potter's Chelsea? In my opinion, no. You see, rather than this being a turning point, I think these last couple of games for Chelsea would be better described as symptoms of progress under Graham Potter, with the real turning point having actually been the 4-1 loss to Brighton way back in October. Now, as much as it sounds ridiculous to say, I think that in the losing spell they were actually closer to real success than they were when they were winning, because their performances were simply not sustainable. To simplify things, picture the pre-Brighton loss Chelsea as Ollie's Man United side, and the post-Brighton loss side as Mikel Arteta's Arsenal. And so to end this video, I'll do a little prediction for what I think is next for the Blues. I reckon they'll win their next few games, but will then probably be knocked out in the Champions League quarters as they see a little blip for a couple weeks, before then seeing the season out with another patch of good form, probably just about qualifying for Europe. Most importantly though, I think they'll continue to grow as a side, so long as they trust the process. And mark my words, it may not be this season or even next, but Chelsea fans, good times will come. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe if you're new and check out my socials, link in the description. But most importantly, enjoy your day.